Welcome to Hidden Teachings, where buried truths are awakened and forgotten stories are revealed in new light. Here we don't just listen to the pages of the Bible. We uncover secrets, uncovering layers of meaning that have been hidden by history, religion, and fear. Prepare yourself because once you embark on this journey, you will never see the world the same again. Judges 19:21 is not only a forgotten part of the Bible, but also one of the most shocking and haunting chapters. So much so that many clergy scholars and faith communities have chosen to keep silent or ignore it. The silence is not because it is unimportant, but because the brutality of the story confronts the reader with a dark side of humanity and society at that time, something that no one wants to face openly. The entire story opens with a key statement. In those days, Israel had no king. This is more than a historical footnote. It is an explanation for the chaos that was about to unfold. When Israel had no king, it meant they had no spiritual leadership, no system of moral control, and no common voice to uphold righteousness. People do what they think is right, but that right is dominated by lust, fear, and indifference, leading to tragedy beyond imagination. What makes Judges 19 so important is not just its brutality, it is that it is the clearest mirror of the fall of a community once chosen by God. No longer a story about foreigners, this is a story about holy people doing the most heinous things in holy territory. The story is not told for entertainment or cheap thrills. It is written to awaken, to convict, and to remind future generations of what happens when people stray from God's guidance. What is remarkable is that for centuries, this section was omitted from children's Bibles, obscured in popular teaching, and rarely even quoted from the pulpit. Not because it is not worthy of being mentioned, but because it is so real, so raw, so different from the beautiful image that many people expect of God's people. But because of that, it is all the more worth pondering. Judges 19:10-21 is living proof that when there is no moral order, evil can arise from anywhere, even within a faith community. The unofficial censorship of these chapters in the public consciousness has prevented many from ever being exposed to one of the most powerful warnings in the entire Bible. And for that reason, when someone dares to dig into this section, they do not just discover a story, they are faced with a question: under what leadership are we living? The story opens with a seemingly unlikely character, a Levite, a member of the clan chosen by God to serve in the temple, living in the hill country of Ephraim. However, instead of being committed to his divine mission, he lives far from the center of worship. And his first act of reference is that he takes a concubine from Bethlehem in the land to the south. The fact that a Levite, a representative of holiness, lives as a commoner and chooses to live with a concubine who has no official legal status suggests a moral deviation from the outset. The concubine is later described as unfaithful, but the Bible does not elaborate. This lack of information leaves many gaps. Was it an emotional betrayal, or was she the victim of an unequal relationship? She left for her father's house in Bethlehem, where she remained for 4 months. The Levite's silence during this time raises questions about his motives, affection, honor, or a need to control. It is noteworthy that he does not send someone to fetch her, but goes himself, suggesting that this relationship, however distorted, still carries honor in the social context of that time. Her father is unusually friendly, constantly asking them to stay for extra days. This makes the audience wonder, is he genuinely hospitable, or is he trying to postpone something he fears will happen on the way? Finally, the Levite leaves at an inopportune moment in the evening, and this is a fateful choice, as the darkness is the premise for the tragedy that will follow. From what seems to be a personal beginning, this story is essentially a symbol of collective collapse. The Levite, representing the spiritual order, steps out of his role. The maid, representing the voiceless, is forced into an ambiguous relationship, and her father, a symbol of procrastination and fear, unable to stop the approaching fate. All of this creates a setting in which people are no longer guided by light, but are groping in darkness, both literally and figuratively. It is from the seemingly private choice of a Levite that a chain of tragedies that extends from the individual to the national level begins to take shape, showing that in a society without spiritual order, every individual decision can become a spark that ignites the entire community. As the Levite, his concubine and servant approach the city of Gibeah, part of the territory of the tribe of Benjamin, the narrative takes a chilling turn. Despite being among their fellow Israelites, no one offers them shelter. This is not just a social snub. In ancient Israelite culture, hospitality was sacred. To refuse a traveler was to dishonor God's covenant. That refusal in Gibeah signals something much deeper, a society so spiritually numb that even basic decency had collapsed. Eventually, an old man returning from the fields notices them and insists they stay in his home. What follows is a scene that mirrors the infamous story of Sodom in Genesis 19. As night falls, a group of men described in Scripture as wicked men surround the house. They beat on the door and demand to sexually violate the male guest. Shockingly, these are not foreigners or pagans. They are fellow Israelites. This isn't happening in a heathen city, but in a town belonging to God's covenant people. The horror isn't external, it comes from within. The old man, trying to protect his guest, does the unthinkable. He offers his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine to the mob instead. This moment exposes the deep rot in Israelite society, where the value of women is seen as negotiable and fear overrides righteousness. Tragically, the Levite agrees. He takes his concubine and hands her over to the mob. What follows is one of the darkest nights recorded in Scripture. She is raped and abused throughout the night. By dawn, she is left collapsed at the doorway, reaching towards safety only to die at the threshold. What makes this even more disturbing is the Levite's reaction. When he finds her lifeless body, there is no grief, no outrage, just a cold command. Get up, let's go. This moment underscores a terrifying truth. Moral apathy had infected even those meant to lead. The Levite. A man from the priestly tribe shows no sign of compassion or spiritual awareness. In a land where everyone does what is right in his own eyes, even the sacred becomes disposable. This chapter isn't included in children's Bibles or often read aloud in churches, not because it lacks meaning, but because it reveals too much about the human condition. It shows how evil thrives not just in foreign lands, but right within the heart of the community that claims to follow God. Gibeah became a second Sodom, not due to outsiders, but because the people within had abandoned justice, empathy, and covenant. And in that abandonment, they allowed the unthinkable to become normalized. After discovering his concubine's lifeless body at the threshold, the Levite does something that stands as one of the most haunting acts in all of Scripture. Instead of mourning or organizing a proper burial, he carries her body home, enters his house, and then, according to Judges 19:29, he takes a knife and cuts her into 12 pieces. He sends each piece to the 12 tribes of Israel. This was not an act of madness or spontaneous rage. The text suggests it was methodical and deliberate. It was a calculated decision to provoke national outrage. The dismemberment of the woman's body wasn't just grotesque, it was symbolic. Each severed piece sent to the tribes served as a blood-soaked message. Look at what has happened within your own borders. Look at what we've become. There is no precedent for this in Israel's history. No prophet had ever done such a thing, and no priest had ever communicated through mutilation. The shock value was undeniable. The tribes of Israel, upon receiving these gruesome packages, reacted in horror. Judges 26:7 records their unified response. Nothing like this has ever happened or been seen. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up. This act forced a reckoning. The Levite essentially held up a mirror soaked in blood, reflecting not just the crime in Gibeah, but the spiritual decay of the entire nation. Importantly, this horror came not from enemies or idolaters, but from within God's chosen people. The mutilated body was a silent scream that pierced every complacent heart and awakened a sleeping nation. It confronted them with a truth they could no longer ignore. Evil had taken root, not in the tents of outsiders, but among their own. The Levite's actions, while extreme, had a devastating clarity. They demanded justice. Yet his silence during the attack, his inaction at the threshold, and now this brutal gesture raised difficult questions. Was this an act of righteous indignation or self-justification? Was he exposing injustice or trying to mask his own failure to protect her? The Bible doesn't tell us his motives in detail, leaving the reader to wrestle with uncomfortable ambiguity. Regardless, the consequence of his message was seismic. The tribes of Israel could no longer pretend nothing was wrong. The body dismembered and distributed became the physical evidence of how far the nation had fallen. It showed the cost of lawlessness, of moral compromise, and of living without divine accountability. And it reminded Israel and us that when justice is neglected, horror finds a way to speak louder than words. In the aftermath of the Levites' shocking message, the 12 tribes of Israel unite in righteous fury. What happened in Gibeah is not just seen as a crime, it is viewed as a national disgrace. The initial response seems justifiable. The tribes demand that the perpetrators from Gibeah, a town within the tribe of Benjamin, be handed over for judgment. But the tribe of Benjamin refuses. They choose tribal loyalty over moral accountability, defending their own, instead of confronting the evil within. This refusal triggers a brutal civil war. Judges 20 records a conflict not between Israel and its enemies, but between brothers, fellow Israelites. 11 tribes rise against one. The war is long, bloody, and costly. Over 65,000 Israelites die in the conflict, including thousands from the tribe of Benjamin. Cities are destroyed, families are shattered, and the promised land, once flowing with milk and honey, is soaked in the blood of its own people. At first, the motive is justice. But justice, when untethered from wisdom and mercy, quickly spirals into vengeance. By the end of the war, only 600 Benjamite men remain. The rest, men, women, and children, are wiped out. Israel is suddenly faced with a terrifying realization. One of the 12 tribes is on the brink of extinction. And this irreversible loss came not from foreign invasion, but from an internal decision fueled by unchecked anger and a desire for retribution. Judges 21 reveals the tragic irony. The same tribes that destroyed Benjamin are now filled with regret. They mourn the loss of a tribe, but instead of seeking God's guidance, they devise human solutions violent and morally questionable. To find wives for the remaining Benjamites, they massacre another city, Jabesh-Gilead, for not participating in the war, killing all but 400 unmarried women. These women are given to the Benjamites. Still short 200 wives, the elders authorize a mass kidnapping during a religious festival, telling the Benjamites to lie in wait and seize the dancing girls. The descent is complete. A pursuit of justice led to war, war led to genocide, and the attempt to fix it brought about forced marriages and the exploitation of innocent women. This chain of decisions reveals a sobering truth: you can choose your sin, but you cannot choose your consequences. Each step, however justified, carried unintended fallout, devastating not only the guilty, but the innocent as well. What began with a single act of violence against one woman ended in a national crisis where every solution brought more damage. The book of Judges makes no attempt to sanitize these events. It doesn't justify them. Instead, it exposes the raw consequences of a nation that abandoned spiritual order. And in doing so, it offers a timeless warning: justice must be rooted in divine wisdom, or it will become just another form of destruction. The narrative of Judges 19:21 does more than recount a tragedy. It uncovers 5 deeply confronting lessons about human nature, society, and the consequences of spiritual drift. These lessons are not buried in symbolism or allegory. They are painfully clear and startlingly relevant. Lesson 1. When there is no accountability, moral chaos follows. The story opens with a defining phrase: "In those days, Israel had no king." This wasn't merely a statement about political structure. It revealed a deeper spiritual void. Without divine leadership or moral accountability, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Without external correction or internal conviction, communities descend into ethical confusion. When no one answers to a higher standard, even God's chosen people can spiral into unspeakable darkness. Lesson 2. Every human being bears the image of God and must be treated as sacred. One of the most devastating moments in the story is when both the old man and the Levite choose to offer women, his daughter, and the concubine to a violent mob. The message is clear in their fear. In broken ethics, they viewed female life as disposable. This isn't just ancient injustice. It echoes modern patterns of objectification, exploitation, and silence in the face of abuse. Genesis 1:27 declares that both male and female are created in God's image. When we lose sight of that truth, we begin to justify actions that strip others of their dignity and humanity. Lesson 3. Sin does not erupt, it creeps in. The events in Gibeah didn't happen overnight. They were the end result of gradual compromise. Disconnection from God doesn't always feel like rebellion. It starts with neglect, a skip prayer, a silenced conscience, a small decision that goes unchecked. Over time, what once seemed unthinkable becomes possible. The story shows us that sin rarely announces itself. Like fog, it moves in silently, blinding people to truth until it's too late. Lesson 4. You can choose your sin, but you cannot choose your consequences. The tribe of Benjamin chose to protect the guilty. The Levite chose to remain silent. Israel chose vengeance over wisdom. Each decision set off a chain reaction that left thousands dead, women kidnapped, and entire cities erased. Sin always carries weight beyond its moment. The consequences ripple outward, touching the innocent, the uninvolved, and the next generation. Scripture never says God approved of these solutions. It simply records them as evidence of a people responding to crisis without divine direction. Lesson 5. Even in ruin, God makes space for restoration. Despite the bloodshed, despite the moral devastation, Judges doesn't end in total annihilation. The tribe of Benjamin is not erased. Cities are eventually rebuilt. Families, however fractured, begin again. This is not to excuse what happened, but to show that God's grace can still reach into the ashes. His mercy doesn't erase consequences, but it does offer hope beyond them. The message is clear: even when humanity fails spectacularly, God's redemptive plan is not over. Together, these lessons form a mirror. They reflect not just ancient Israel, but our own lives, our communities, and our choices. The chaos in Judges wasn't due to the absence of religion, it was the result of ignoring God's kingship. And that same danger remains today when we replace divine guidance with personal preference. The line between justice and destruction begins to blur. The closing verse of the book of Judges is not just a summary, it is a final warning. Judges 21:25 states, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." This haunting declaration encapsulates the spiritual and moral unraveling of an entire nation. It doesn't merely describe the absence of a monarch. It reveals a deeper crisis, the absence of divine authority, of moral clarity, of spiritual accountability. Throughout Judges, Israel cycles through rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and relapse. But by chapters 19-21, even those cycles break down. There is no judge, no prophet, no voice from heaven, only chaos. And at the center of that chaos is a nation that has lost its compass. The law still exists, but it is ignored. God is still present, but his voice is drowned out by human reasoning and tribal instincts. The people are not atheists. They are self-guided, spiritually disengaged, and dangerously independent. They are religious in ritual, but rebellious in reality. This final verse doesn't just close a book, it holds up a mirror. It forces the reader to confront a sobering question: who is king in your life? When personal opinion replaces divine wisdom, when truth becomes subjective, and when everyone becomes their own moral authority, the results are catastrophic. The horrors of Gibeah, the civil war, the destruction of entire tribes all flow from this one root cause: Israel no longer submitted to God's rule. And this isn't ancient history, it's painfully modern. Today we live in a culture saturated with self-definition, where my truth often replaces the truth. Boundaries are blurred, convictions are diluted, accountability is viewed as oppression. Like Israel, we may maintain the form of faith while ignoring its substance. We may claim to follow God while living by our own instincts. And just like in Judges, the consequences of that disconnect do not stay personal. They ripple through families, communities, and nations. Yet even in this grim conclusion, there is a silent invitation. If the root of the crisis was the absence of a king, then the solution is the return of one, not a political ruler, but the rightful spiritual king. The book of Judges ends in darkness, but it points forward to the need for divine leadership, a foreshadowing of what would come through the line of David and ultimately through Christ. The final line of Judges is not just descriptive, it is diagnostic. It tells us what happens when a people no longer look upward for guidance. And for every viewer, reader, or listener today, it leaves one enduring question echoing in the silence. Are you doing what is right in your own eyes? Are you living under the rule of the true king? The answer to that question determines whether your story, like Israel's, descends into chaos or moves toward restoration. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's reflect together. And if this journey moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Hidden Teachings for more truth beneath the surface.